When Jimmy Cliff found classified documents proving his own record company was trying to destroy reggae music, he launched the most legendary rebellion in music history. It was November 3rd, 1973, at Island Records headquarters in London. Jimmy Cliff had just finished recording what he thought would be his breakthrough album for the international market. He was the first reggae artist to sign with a major label, and everyone said he was about to become the biggest star in the world. What Jimmy didn't know was that his own record company was secretly working to make sure reggae music would never succeed globally, and he was about to discover their plan in the most shocking way possible. Jimmy had arrived at the Island Records building early that morning for what he believed was a routine meeting about his album's promotion strategy. His manager had told him to meet in Conference Room B on the 3rd floor at 10 a.m. But when Jimmy got off the elevator, he realized he had misheard the room number. Instead of Conference Room B, he walked into Conference Room A. The room was empty, but scattered across the large mahogany table were dozens of documents marked confidential and Project Silence. Jimmy's curiosity got the better of him. He glanced at the top document and saw his own name in the header, Memo Phase 1 Jimmy Cliff Containment Strategy. Jimmy's heart started racing. Containment strategy? What did that mean? He picked up the document and began reading. What he discovered would change not just his career, but the entire future of reggae music. The memo was from Richard Blackwood, the senior vice president of Island Records, addressed to a group called the Atlantic Music Coalition. The document outlined a detailed plan to prevent reggae music from gaining mainstream acceptance in America and Europe. According to the memo, reggae was considered a cultural and political threat that needed to be neutralized before it could influence young people globally. Jimmy's hands were shaking as he read further. The plan was diabolical in its sophistication. Phase 1 involved signing the most promising reggae artists to major label contracts, then systematically sabotaging their careers through inadequate promotion, poor production, and strategic scheduling conflicts that would prevent their music from reaching mass audiences. But that wasn't the worst part. Phase 2 involved using these same artists as examples of reggae's commercial failure to discourage other labels from signing Caribbean musicians. The goal was to create a perception that reggae music simply wasn't viable in international markets. Jimmy found another document titled P Psychological Profile, Reggae Music Influence. It described reggae as dangerous because it promoted anti-establishment sentiments, racial unity, and spiritual consciousness that could undermine traditional power structures. The document specifically mentioned Bob Marley, Peter Tosh, and Jimmy himself as primary threats to social stability. As Jimmy continued reading, he discovered that Island Records was just one part of a larger conspiracy involving multiple major labels, radio station networks, and even government agencies. They had been monitoring reggae artists, infiltrating their recording sessions, and deliberately suppressing their music for years. One memo revealed that radio programmers had been given explicit instructions to avoid playing reggae music during peak listening hours. Another document showed that music critics had been paid to write negative reviews of reggae albums, regardless of their actual quality. There was even evidence of payoffs to concert venue owners to cancel reggae shows at the last minute. Jimmy found his own file, and what he read made him sick to his stomach. Every struggle he had experienced in his career, the delayed album releases, the cancelled tours, the radio stations that wouldn't play his music, hadn't been bad luck or market conditions. It had all been orchestrated by his own record label. The file contained detailed notes about his personality, his political beliefs, his spiritual practices, and his relationships with other Jamaican artists. There were transcripts of his private phone conversations that had somehow been recorded. There were photos of him at Rastafarian gatherings that he had never seen before. Most disturbing of all, there was a section titled Neutralization Timeline that outlined a 5-year plan to gradually destroy his career. The plan involved releasing his albums with minimal promotion, booking him at small venues in markets where reggae had no following, and eventually dropping him from the label when his sales figures declined due to lack of support. Jimmy realized he was looking at the blueprint for the systematic destruction of an entire musical genre, and he was supposed to be their first casualty. As he was photographing the documents with a small camera he always carried, Jimmy heard voices in the hallway. Someone was approaching conference room A. He quickly gathered the papers into their original positions and hid behind a large plant in the corner of the room. 3 men entered the room, and Jimmy recognized their voices immediately. Richard Blackwood from Island Records, Marcus Sterling from Columbia Records, and David Walsh from a company called Atlantic Media Consulting, which Jimmy had never heard of before. "The Cliff situation is proceeding according to schedule," Blackwood said, sitting down at the head of the table. "His album will be released with minimal radio support, and we've already ensured that most major venues won't book reggae acts for the next 18 months. Sterling nodded. "Our contacts at the major radio networks are fully committed. Reggae music won't get mainstream airplay in America as long as we control the narrative." Walsh opened a briefcase and pulled out a thick folder. "The government liaison confirms that reggae artists will face additional scrutiny at customs and immigration checkpoints. We can create enough bureaucratic delays to prevent major touring." Jimmy was stunned. This wasn't just about his career or even reggae music. This was about maintaining cultural control and preventing a form of artistic expression that promoted unity, consciousness, and resistance to oppression. Blackwood continued, "The beauty of this strategy is that we can destroy reggae music while appearing to support it. We sign the artists, give them just enough success to keep them hopeful, then systematically undermine them when they fail. It's market forces, not discrimination." "What about Marley?" Sterling asked. "He's becoming more popular despite our efforts." Walsh smiled coldly. "Marley is being handled separately. Let's just say his international touring will become much more complicated very soon." Jimmy had heard enough. He waited until the men left the room, then carefully photographed the remaining documents. He had evidence of the most extensive conspiracy in music history, and he knew exactly what he had to do with it. But Jimmy Cliff wasn't just going to expose the conspiracy, he was going to turn it into the very weapon that would liberate reggae music forever. Over the next 6 months, Jimmy launched what music historians now call Operation Jar Justice, the most creative and effective rebellion against corporate music control ever conceived. His plan was brilliant in its simplicity. He would use the conspiracy's own methods against them. First, Jimmy secretly reached out to Bob Marley, Peter Tosh, Burning Spear, and every other major reggae artist. He shared the classified documents and proposed a coordinated response. Instead of fighting the system directly, they would create an alternative system that made the major labels irrelevant. Jimmy used his insider knowledge of the conspiracy to anticipate every move the labels would make. When radio stations were instructed not to play reggae during peak hours, Jimmy organized a network of college radio stations and independent broadcasters who were eager to support suppressed music. When major venues were pressured to cancel reggae shows, he helped create a circuit of smaller venues that became legendary for their intimate reggae performances. Most importantly, Jimmy realized that the conspiracy depended on controlling information about reggae music. So he launched an unprecedented grassroots marketing campaign that bypassed traditional media entirely. He created underground distribution networks, organized word-of-mouth campaigns, and used the emerging technology of cassette tapes to spread reggae music directly to fans. The turning point came in March 1974, when Jimmy organized the first free reggae festival in New York's Central Park. The event was completely independent of the major label system. Bob Marley, Peter Tosh, and Jimmy himself performed for over 50,000 people without any corporate sponsorship or mainstream media support. The festival was so successful that it caught the attention of independent record labels, progressive radio stations, and music journalists who had been unaware of the suppression campaign. Suddenly, reggae music had allies throughout the industry who were committed to supporting it, specifically because it had been unfairly targeted. Within a year, Jimmy's rebellion had created an entirely new infrastructure for reggae music. Independent labels like Trojan Records and Heartbeat Records emerged to give reggae artists the creative and financial support they had been denied by major labels. College radio stations across America began featuring reggae programs. Music festivals started including Caribbean artists on their lineups. The major labels found themselves in an impossible position. Their conspiracy had been designed to work in secret, but Jimmy's rebellion had made reggae suppression a public issue. Critics, fans, and even some industry insiders began questioning why such powerful music had been kept from mainstream audiences. By 1975, reggae music was more popular internationally than it had ever been, and it was succeeding specifically because it had been kept independent of the corporate system that had tried to destroy it. Bob Marley's Catch a Fire album became a global phenomenon. Peter Tosh's Legalize It sparked international conversations about social justice. Jimmy's own music reached audiences across Europe, Africa, and America. The conspiracy that was supposed to kill reggae music had instead made it unstoppable. The independence forced on reggae artists by corporate suppression had created a stronger, more authentic musical movement that couldn't be controlled by any single entity. In 1977, 3 years after Jimmy discovered the classified documents, Richard Blackwood was forced to resign from Island Records following a public investigation into music industry discrimination. Marcus Sterling left Columbia Records under similar circumstances. The Atlantic Music Coalition was disbanded, and several of its members faced criminal charges for conspiracy to restrain trade. But Jimmy's greatest victory wasn't the destruction of the conspiracy. It was the transformation of reggae music into a global force for social change that operated completely outside corporate control. The underground distribution networks he created became the model for independent music distribution worldwide. The college radio partnerships he established introduced millions of young people to Caribbean culture and Rastafarian spirituality. The festival circuit he helped organize created permanent platforms for reggae artists to reach international audiences. In 1982, Jimmy Cliff was inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, becoming the first reggae artist to receive this honor. During his acceptance speech, he revealed the full story of the 1973 conspiracy and how the attempt to silence reggae music had actually amplified its message around the world. They tried to contain reggae music, Jimmy said, but you cannot contain truth. You cannot contain love. You cannot contain the consciousness that comes from Jah. What they meant for evil, we turned into good. What they designed to destroy us, we used to build something stronger. The classified documents that Jimmy photographed that day in Conference Room A are now displayed in the Reggae Music Heritage Museum in Kingston, Jamaica. They serve as a reminder that artistic suppression often backfires, creating stronger movements than would have existed without opposition. Today, reggae music influences genres from hip-hop to electronic music to world music fusion. Its messages of unity, social justice, and spiritual consciousness reach billions of people worldwide. The conspiracy that was meant to prevent this global influence instead created the conditions that made it inevitable. Jimmy Cliff's discovery of those classified documents didn't just save his career, it liberated an entire musical genre and proved that corporate power cannot ultimately suppress authentic artistic expression. The most legendary rebellion in music history succeeded because it was built on truth, creativity, and the unshakable belief that music belongs to the people, not to the corporations that try to control it. If this incredible story of musical rebellion and corporate conspiracy moved you, make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell for more amazing tales of how music legends fought against the system and won. Share this video with someone who believes in the power of independent art over corporate control. Have you ever discovered something that completely changed how you saw an industry or system? Let us know in the comments below, and don't forget to check out our other videos about the secret battles that shaped music history.